Zechariah is preaching encouragement to a people trying to get their lives back to some sense of normalcy in post-exilic times. Interesting, isn't it, that both prophets are profound and significant, and yet both of them come at their prophetic roles differently, and both are extremely necessary. And in the second of 8 visions given to him, he reveals that part of loving God and trusting God, part of loving God and representing God, is to live convicted that God leads our lives with precise and intended timing. And that part of right timing includes sometimes growth and maturation, the receipt of power and anointing only on the back end of severe threat and challenge, pain and conflict, encounters and conflicting engagements, confrontations, and unexpected battles. How do you define in your relationship with God right timing? When he moves and what he allows, and when and for what duration, what he releases or restricts, and why was it determined that this was the right time or not? Have you ever explored any of these questions? Is it only positively defined by what it prevents you from having to engage and or endure, having to deal with, or to be altered by? Is it only based on what is prevented or circumvented? Because I submit that this text teaches that you learn so much about the power of God and the enormous power of God's work in your life when you are forced to see God's response to what threatens you, or what God allows you to do or to become in order to address and respond to the challenges and threats that your life must face. Zechariah, the prophet, he has a vision, and his vision is of 4 horns symbolizing nations that attacked Judah and scattered her. This scattering reveals the strength of the attack, the devastation that it caused, the separations that resulted, and the dislocation from everything normal. And before there can even be a sinking about the strength and threat of the horns, the prophet priest says, but then there are 4 craftsmen. It wouldn't mean much to us without the preceding attack of the horns. In fact, only the presence of the horns heightens the awareness of and the appreciation for the craftsmen. These craftsmen are used by God, whether they represent men specifically or a nation generally. They are used by God to overthrow what has threatened and scattered Judah. And the simple point that I want to make is you can't appreciate at times the power of God to deliver without the feeling of and the experience of the pain of being scattered. Judah can only appreciate this deliverance from 70 years of captivity because of how hard those years were and what they took and what they demanded. But to watch God deliver, to watch God destroy every enemy and every threat and return them to their land and restore them to their history and resource them for their protection and revive them so that they are renewed, it all points to whether our faith has any room or capacity, I would dare say any maturity, to believe that God defines timing for everything. We need this. We need this with such strong resistance to a democratic process and unending attempts to betray the choices that a country has made. We need this. We need this when we have to manage that and the threat of a virus for which we have yet to emerge from healthy and or recovered. We need this. with an economy trying to recover, but having already left so many too far behind. We need this while small businesses hold their breath and states try to make wise decisions, balancing our restlessness and our want to be together with the severity of our need to stay distant one from the other. We need this. And the question that all of us have to wrestle with is, do we trust that God better defines what for us is right timing? Faith is not just trusting God's person and his goodness, his power and his protection. Faith in God is not just appreciating God's sacrifice of his only son and his adoption of us into his royal family, his redemption that brought our salvation. But faith in God is also trusting his timing, when that includes burdens before blessings, silence before speech, ambivalence before revelation, struggle before success, not enough before more than enough. Why do I need to see threatening horns before I notice defending craftsmen? And can I suggest to us that this text is attempting to teach us this weekend that there are times when you have to see threatening horns before you witness defending craftsmen, because we need to be reminded and become convicted of the truth that God's timing is eternal and not reactive. Nothing in your life is God simply reacting to. And more than that is this salient divine theological truth. Everything in your life is a part of God's eternal providence in your life. So when horns precede craftsmen and struggle precedes progress, it is always about what God apparently wants to grow in you. And more than likely, it's to grow your faith and sharpen your response to the things that have threatened your life. If you live your whole life without four horns threatening to scatter your life emotionally, physically, spiritually, or whatever, if you always have God defeating these threats before they intimidate and attempt to scatter your hopes, or that God prevents these threats from ever getting close enough to your life to raise your level of anxiety and concern, then you build no deep convictions about God's character and God's capacity to deliver his children or to sustain or to defend. Sometimes God can prevent trouble, but he permits it because he wants to prove to you that he can step in and make trouble pass you by. I've developed many of my spiritual convictions about God's power, not just from what I meditate on from his word, but from what I've watched him do when in front of me are the threatening horns intending to scatter and disrupt my life. And when I accept God's grace to live sustained by him and accept his divine provisions that feed me thoroughly and his insights that show me ways of escape, I get a chance to grow. I get a chance to deepen my faith. I get a chance to add substance to my testimony and to bring the real melody to my music. I get a chance for people to hear, to see, to sense, and to discern that I'm not just talking about a God I've heard about. I'm talking about a God I know for myself. Sometimes I come back from trouble so that I can testify that I know that trouble don't last always. Am I making any sense? God always has a response to what threatens my life. And his response always protects the essence of who I am in him. So therefore, whatever the order God allows, whether threats precede deliverance, pandemic has to be managed along with the attempts of the wicked, to destroy the house that is being swept and ordered, going around these demons looking for 7 more that are wicked like unto itself, and the attempt is to make things worse before they get better. I'm not shaken at all. I'm not doubtful at all. I'm not fearful at all. In fact, I'm more encouraged now than I've ever been. I'm excited because God owns in his own sovereignty the order of response to my life. And my offering of faithfulness to him is to not get weary in my well-doing. You know why? Because he not only controls my life, but he controls timing. And here's my word of encouragement to you. Don't you get hung up on the way things are rolling out in your life. Just walk through it knowing God's response is eternal and not reactive. No threat in your life is so large or strong or threatening that God doesn't have a response to it. No responsibility, no pace for managing the heavy weights on your life are pressing on you without surrendering to God's response, which is eternal. And listen, the nexus of God's power is in his eternality. He is the everlasting essence of power and might and capacity and strength, which means there is nothing in your life that can happen where God will need to pivot or shift or call an audible. It just can't happen. And let me tell you why. Because nothing that happens to you catches him by surprise. This means whatever he allows is purposeful. It is developmental, that these horns precede these craftsmen. God is not reacting. He never puts his children at risk, even when he lets risk come close to your dwelling. When he lets threat and danger be released, you are never at risk as if God is unaware or ill-prepared or caught off guard or caught by surprise. Nothing that Satan attempts to do catches God by surprise. God always has a response. And don't you ever forget it. He's eternal. Don't you ever forget that. He's not reacting. He is guiding. He is disclosing. He's progressing your life exactly according to his eternal will. So when he lets life hit you hard, when he lets it buckle you, when it bends you at your knees, you don't point your finger in God's face as if God was not on the throne or he had abnegated his divine sovereign responsibility, or that God has to apologize for the hedge of protection becoming weakened around your life. The devil is a liar. When God lets things happen in our lives, he attaches purpose to it, and providence is clothed over top of it. And that's why Paul says he is working all things together for my good. Let me tell you something else about God's timing. It's always the right timing, because his timing always encompasses your readiness. You will only and always in faith be ready for whatever is pressing and demanding and pulling on your life. Are you listening to me? You are ready